Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. From the right, I'm Gary Polland.
And from the left, I'm David Jones.
Tonight we are going to discuss city issues and the candidates running in the City of Houston mayoral race, which is coming up real quick, David. Joining us tonight are Harris County Treasurer Orlando Sanchez, Rice University's Lena Gohlman Fox, Professor Robert M. Stein, which means he got a promotion, and Dr. James Thurmond, Director of the Master of Public Administrations here at the University of Houston.
Yeah, and what Mr. Thurmond probably wishes that I wouldn't disclose is that he is distantly related to Strom Thurmond.
Well, that's very distinguished.
Give us that background.
As of 1790. But we are distantly related. My group of the Thurmonds came to Tennessee and then to Texas in 1836. His group of the Thurmonds stayed in South Carolina.
Oh, so you're off the hook then.
Okay.
Now tell us, Mr. Thurmond, we got a mayor's race. Is Annise Parker going to win this thing with or without a runoff?
Well, just looking at the competition and what has happened over the last 2 years, I would think she would win without a runoff. Because she's addressed some major issues that have popped up, and she seems to have survived those issues. And there hasn't been a major credible candidate that came out and announced against her.
And how would you describe her as a politician? Is she to the public or to you? Is she a conservative? Is she a Democrat? What is she?
I think my perspective, and I had her to speak to two of my classes over the last 2 years, urban politics and twice, and she just comes across to the students and me as a managerial type politician. She's a chief administrative officer for the city of Houston, and she manages the city that way, and she demonstrates leadership because she brings change to the office. You know, she brings change. Change has happened. You may not like it, but the drainage fee happened. The water and sewer rate fee changed. You know, so certain things have changed. So to what she's done and she's apparently what she's done hasn't raised the salience of an issue to the public where they're upset.
Right.
So she doesn't have a strong candidate against her.
So Bob Stein, you've got some numbers. Is Mr. Thurmond on the right track, or is Annise Parker on the right track?
Well, I think that the mayor may not be on the right track, and the city's not on the right track, and I'll disagree a little bit with Dr. Thurmond. The mayor's ratings are unusually low. In fact, I'd go so far as to say her job approval ratings are the lowest I've seen in 32 years. Now, of course, we can explain that because so is the economy in the worst shape it's been in about 60 years. What's interesting is if you think the economy's bad, if your household has unemployment, if your personal financial situation's worst off, you're not any more or less likely to rate the mayor's job approval as positive or negative. So to the extent that we could say the general malaise is the account for the mayor's direct negative ratings among the voters, it's not the case. Her approval rating in 2010, 1 year ago to the day almost, was 56% favorable, excellent or good. That's dropped to 47%. I've never seen an incumbent mayor drop below 50%, least of all in their second term. Going into the third term, as Orlando may remember with Lee Brown, those numbers got close. What's particularly interesting is right-wrong direction for the city. 75% said the city was going in the right direction at the end of Bill White's administration and when Annise Parker was first elected. The number dropped to 65% last year. This time, it's dropped to 47%. What's most I find interesting is that when we ask who you're going to vote for, against, as Mr. Thurmond pointed out, 5 relatively unknown candidates, the mayor gets between 37 and 39% of the vote. 52 to 54% of the people we spoke to don't know who they're going to vote for or some other candidate. No question the mayor is going to win this election, and most likely, if not certainly, she'll win it without a runoff. The important question is, why is the mayor's rating so low? And these are not citizens voting age. These are registered voters who 89% voted in the 2009 election.
Okay, Orlando Sanchez, you once ran for mayor. You now know that the incumbent is weak. Let's assume that this was September the 6th rather than when it is. And you were organizing and preparing for a mayoral race of your own. How would you have defeated Annise Parker?
Well, I think back to the time when I ran for mayor, and I think it is a general malaise. The first thing that citizens look at is the city when you're driving it. And as I drive downtown streets in Houston, they're starting to get back in the shape of the Lee Brown days. In other words, there's massive destruction of the infrastructure, that is the streets that we rebuilt just 10 years ago. So less than 10 years later, we're already tearing up the streets. That's what downtown people see. With respect to response to emergency response, we had an incident where a mother in Kingwood was complaining that she requested an ambulance and an ambulance didn't show up. Taxes are going up. Memorial Park looks pretty bad. The drought exacerbated the killing of the trees. They haven't resurfaced the running track in years. So I think Houstonians that use the facilities day in, day out just see a general slow decline, and there's nothing to get enthusiastic about. So I would point out the infrastructure issues. The services that the city needs to bring to the people are actually declining. They're not improving.
Who was that candidate then that we could have had in this race that would have made these arguments?
Well, I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, but none of the ones that are in now have the resources necessary.
You're making arguments against Gary's favorite mayor. See?
Well, look, and I think it's fair to say, look, if you look at the situation, what you've talked about is interesting, and what has caused that is partially the just say no attitude among our friends, the conservatives, saying you can never raise taxes under any circumstances, no matter what, period. I mean, and that's one of the things it said. You take Grover Norquist's pledge, that's what you're saying. But the truth is, Orlando, as you know, and I know, and responsible conservatives know, there are certain instances where, you have to raise taxes because you got to be able to pay for things that aren't getting paid for. For example, how's the city going to pay to clean up Memorial Park with all the dead trees and replant? There's no money available in the budget to do that. Not as
user
tight
fees.
As the budget's
been. Let those runners pay.
I mean, the mayor actually instituted the biggest increase in water and sewer rates in a city that was well below comparable cities. She supported, not actively campaigned for, a drainage fee, both of which will have a dramatic effect, $20 million on infrastructure.
That's what I think is important. That's why I think she, when we looked at her, we thought she thought like a manager does somewhat, because managers would think about, let's go look at the user fees, and if we have a problem with the infrastructure, or we have things that people can identify, water and sewer, if we're competitive, maybe we need to increase the fees that are to cover some of the costs. And the same with the drainage fee. Finally, you're going to find users that actually apply. They contribute to the drainage problem, and maybe they're paying for the problem.
But part of that, Dr. Stein and Orlando and Dr. Thurmond, is I think what this is, that the people actually are not saying we don't want taxes ever to go up. What they're saying is, we don't trust the politicians to spend general revenue responsibly. What we want to do is be able to vote on things that we want more of. For example, more infrastructure. In terms of sewer and water rates, I mean, my understanding is they had to raise them because the White administration looted the money and used it for other things.
Well, let's be fair. It wasn't just the White administration. This goes back many decades where mayors, when they needed money into the general fund, as you know, Bob, would raid the Water Sewer Enterprise Fund.
So
and there was enough money built into the revenues. In other words, that means the water bill that citizens in the city of Houston got, not only to pay for the current treatment of the water, but to put into a fund where you would make improvements to the infrastructure. We rated that, so now we're in a position where we need to find a new stream of revenue.
There's something else you need to remember, and my colleague Steve Kleinberg and Steve Murdoch at Rice will tell you this. The electorate in Houston has dramatically changed. In 2009, turnout for the mayor's race with four strong candidates, including Roy Morales, three who'd spent $1 million or more each, was 21%. We estimate the turnout on November 6th, along with the early voting and mail-in voting, won't even break 15% probably. Wow. Here's what's interesting. When I came to Houston in 1979, all my polls were 75% Anglo, maybe 15% African American, and a conservative, a liberal, 10% Hispanic Asian. Now we're talking about an electorate, the people who are on the voter list being majority non-Anglo. However, the number of voters that will show up is so declining that Anglo voters are actually a majority. What's happening is the base of our electorate is changing. Hispanics, African Americans, and it's Hispanics who simply don't vote, in large part because of age, mobility, lack of registration as a result of moving around. And so what you're seeing are incredibly small. I don't think we'll break 160,000 votes, maybe not even 150. And that's historically low, and it changes the dynamics of what a mayor does.
And they're not making arguments to appeal to that part of the electorate. I mean, African Americans have to be disappointed. They wanted a candidate against Annise Parker. They couldn't get one. So, and I don't even see that she's making electoral arguments to ask for their votes. She wants people on the west side to vote, and that's about it.
Because they do vote.
When former Mayor Lee Brown and I ran, I mean, we had a pretty historic turnout.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
it was
it was
sizable,
huge.
and we almost reached 15. I think it was Tacho Mendiola at the University of Houston said it was almost 14% Hispanic turnout. So the argument about Hispanics not voting, historically they have not, and they're not registered given their demographics. Some of them, the majority of them are under 18, many are because of immigration status. But when there is a candidate that has sufficient funding and excites that vote, they will turn out.
No question. And then they have, and I think Roy Morales, Orlando's race against Lee Brown going into his third term is historic, not only because he may not remember it, but he led the general election by 10,000 votes. It was Lee Brown who had then, it was the only election in the last 35 years where turnout increased in the general, in the runoff, and then over what we had in the general, and it was awfully high.
Well,
it was like
absolutely.
36%.
Yeah, and I remember the model that we had worked out for Orlando, because I worked on Orlando's campaign. We worked on a model of how many votes we would need to win the runoff, and he exceeded that and still lost because of the historic African-American turnout that Lee Brown was able to generate with
very, very good election day turnout.
We'll have to ask Mr. Thurmond about African-American turnout.
Well, the only thing I know, I thought that then the Locke, didn't he endorse Parker? So she has an endorsement.
Yes, Locke has endorsed
So she
Parker.
has an endorsement. Maybe she feels like that's sufficient. But I want to ask you, Bob, if the demographics are changing, does that affect surveying? Your survey results.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
I'll give you an example, and I think it speaks to the African-American vote. When I poll, and Dick Murray, my colleague in U of H Center for Public Policy, we do the survey work through them, we usually have a very difficult time getting African-Americans, particularly African-American males. And I will often have to weight my samples upward for the 25%. Unweighted, this sample was 38% African Americans. Yes, Yolanda Jones is up for a very tough re-election, as is an open seat in District B, West Side New District K, although it's not a competitive district. Larry Green, I think, is going to probably win that. What's important is this, where African American women supported Annise Parker over Jean Locke in 2009, now they're undecidedly lipid about Annise Parker.
Well,
and that's, I think what it is black voters generally do not support the mayor, haven't because of the red light camera and the drainage fee. And let me tell you, the drainage fee is still an issue. It passed by 6,000 votes in 2010, 49-50, barely 50. Our poll shows the same split between
Well,
voters.
and who historically has motivated the African American community to go vote is, at the pulpit. And who's bearing the brunt of the drainage fee? Well,
the churches have been exempt.
They've been exempt, but they still have that sour...
Here's what's important. I think this is what the mayor's problem is. She doesn't effectively communicate a message. I think Dr. Thurmond's absolutely right. She is she's a manager. She's not an elected mayor. This is the strongest form of mayor government in the country, and she uses it if she was still on the council with Orlando Sanchez. I don't think she realizes at times she is a mayor. It was when she was on council, she acted as a much more aggressive member, took on the mayor, wanted to be part of that. And now, as mayor, she doesn't seem quite to understand that the council has the same aspirations. And with the voters, she seems to almost be invisible. One of the hard things in this is people like her as a person. They just don't particularly think she's managing well. It's ironic because I'd have to agree with Dr. Thurmond. The management of this city more looks like what you would get from a conservative Anglo-Republican candidate. No new taxes, fees tied to services received, and a very conservative view about cutting back services. Yet the voters are not have an appetite for that because they're disproportionately.
Sanchez and Thurmond, let me ask you this. The budget of the city of Houston, 70 cents of every dollar goes to police and fire and debt service. What else is the city of Houston doing that allows a mayor to go out and say, we're going to do this in the city of Houston? Because they really don't have the infrastructure the investment infrastructure, I guess, of the political infrastructure to do much, do they not? And so aren't they handicapped because the city of Houston, unfunded and without a sense of obligation to its lesser citizens?
Well, go ahead.
Well, first of all, almost any city that has police and fire, at least over 50% of the budget goes to police and fire. That's not unusual. 70% seems like quite a bit, but that may be the norm for cities over 1 million. I'm not sure. But at the same time, you're fixed on your resources. So any city council or mayor only knows if they want to fix the budget, they can only they have discretionary funds they can fool with. It's limited. So the way to address that is what she's done and what we've been talking about, is some kind of user fees where people use the service and the volume they use for they pay for. That's one way to address some of that if they want to have a shortfall.
All right. Well, so I was going to ask you, Dr. Stein, the politics of the mayor's race. There are rumors that we had starting last year. Who was going to challenge Annise Parker? Everyone knew she'd be well financed. I think she raised $3 million, and was certainly not going to spend it all this time either. But there were people looking at it. First, there was Ben Hall, who was out kicking tires for a long time, talking to people, thinking he could put together the African American conservative coalition that would get vault him into the mayor's race. He didn't go. He got gun shy. Then they were talking to Bill King, and they talked to Paul Betancourt. And the last person they talked to, not you, Orlando, I guess they could have talked to you, but Rod Page. He was put out as someone who maybe, former school superintendent and former secretary of education. Would he run for mayor? None of them wanted to run. And
for good reason.
And the reason?
And I think that there are two. One, remember, we're a term-limited office for both mayor, council, and controller. There's no advantage in running against a second or first-term incumbent mayor, no matter how poor they may have performed or poorly doing it. Why? Because you've got plenty of time to get at them without an open seat. Second, it's not obvious to me that the economy is going to improve, although I don't think the bad economy is a direct cause of her low ratings. It's an indirect one. It does leave, as we've just suggested, no revenues. I would expect that if she runs below 65% of the popular vote in this election, she will see two things that will change. One, I think the council will look at her differently. The council will have, of course, 2 new members. It's conceivable there'll be 3 members on this council, all of whom have served in the state legislature: Melissa Noriega, Ellen Cohn, and Christy Tebow. All of whom have had good relations with each other. One of the things the mayor has had going for her is very close votes. She has said on more than one occasion, I don't mind 8-7 votes, or now it might be 9-7 votes. But the important point is, I think the council will look to leadership within themselves. And I think the other is that if the economy continues to go bad, she's going to have to make cuts, and she's going to have to find new revenues. Look for things like payment in lieu of taxes,
but she can,
which will hit the nonprofits.
She can mask that. In other words, she can put together a coalition that votes one way, and it appears that the mayor's on board, and still show a victory. I mean,
no question. But she's had some terrible fights with council,
yeah.
And one of the problems is, as has often been pointed out, is that you don't get to shuffle the deck and get a new council. But every day, every week is learn to let the same 8 people. Excuse me, the same 11 to 12 people coming in.
But you know how difficult it is for council members to get together on any issue,
no
Bob.
question.
I mean, it's going to be. There's a lot of rivalry among council members. So, who among them is going to lead?
That's what I'm saying. I'm looking for a new leadership that I've not seen, probably going back to the days when you and Chris Bell and Annise Parker. What's ironic about this is a mayor with so much experience. This is the only mayor in the history of the city to acquire the office of mayor through the progression of 2 terms as mayor, as council member, 2 terms as controller. She was ready to run. Every other mayor before, from Lee Brown to Bill White to Bob Lanier, had never served a day in elective office, least of all other than Lee Brown as a chief of police. You would have thought she was ready to do all the things that she had said Lee Brown failed to do, that the councils that she'd been on, and as controller.
But don't you think, I mean, I would give her more credit for leadership than maybe you are. Because to me, yeah, that may be why your survey results are what they are. She's lost political capital, and she hasn't been afraid to spend political capital to get something done. It took something to get the drainage fees, the water and sewer rates, the things she's pushed.
How about the red light camera? Because I'm not convinced that she had much to do with the drainage fee.
Well, the red light camera she inherited from Bill White.
No question, but she actively supported it.
And the drainage fee was not her idea.
And was not. I mean, I'm not certain her administration. I don't question her judgment. As a manager,
leadership.
I think she'd be a good city manager.
What about redistricting?
But I think the redistricting case, and money would say, would have been a bloodbath. So she brings in a consultant, the plan is presented, and what do we get? Not the plan that the consultant or the mayor's office. She basically stepped aside and sat as a council member and said, let the council decide. Yeah. I applaud that. But what I'm suggesting here is when you're the strongest mayor in a country of 80,000 cities, your first order of business is getting reelected. And getting reelected allows you to govern. And losing is a problem, but winning can also be a problem if your margin it's kind of inconceivable that she doesn't represent more than 9% of the Houston electorate. That's not something that you can govern with, as Orlando or you've just said, when you have to make the really tough decisions. When you look at your revenues and say, can I go after a nonprofit and ask them to make a payment in lieu of taxes? Can I raise more fees? Can I start talking about set-aside programs, hire Houston only? Yeah. She's going to look at some tough ones. This whole thing with the food deserts is a problem, and preservation. I support all these policies, and I think most Houstonians do too. The problem is she's not really operated like a mayor. She's operated like a council member and has given up a lot.
I was going to say that. I mean, the system is set up that she should walk in and have a very powerful presence. I mean, she controls the agenda. Everybody in the city of Houston, all the department heads report to her. They don't report to city council members. And so it seems like she's had some difficulty transitioning, as Bob says, from a legislative position into the executive position. And it calls into question the ability to look into the future and say, where is Houston going to be in 15, 20 years? And sort of the Louis Welch thing. And I mean, you start looking at Lake Houston, or you start looking at potential.
So what you're both saying is
airport.
we had leaders. We had leaders when we didn't have term limits. The Commissioner's Court, where Orlando is close, they don't have term limits.
2 4-year terms. I have to say, I sat on the commission. I did most of the staffing work on that. We produced a proposal for 2 4-year terms. The mayor supported it. And it's not inside ball. All you got to do is watch the C-SPAN or local network. She claimed to have 2 votes she didn't have.
She lost it at her own council.
Yeah, well, I will tell you, it's interesting. You talk about term limits. Even talking to conservative friends, that they don't think this 3 2-year terms is working.
No, it's not. I tell you,
there's ready for change, and
I would expect it to be on the ballot in 2013. But I also expect this drainage fee to pop its head back up. Watch, for instance, what car dealerships are going to start doing. They're realizing that as car dealerships who have big lots, all paved with lots of cars, that they're paying an enormous amount of money.
And the apartment association?
Apartments have come around because, and their churches and nonprofits have been exempted. But I think here's the problem: when that ordinance was written, it was written as a petition ballot, not as an ordinance. And when it came to the mayor, it came as a done deal. I don't know this for a fact, but I'll guess that would not have been written, the petition, that way, had it been written by council and the mayor. It was written by, of course, an advocate group.
But Bob, she appeared weak too in terms of leading on that issue. She
let Renew Houston
it's a city council member. She didn't take a position, stake out a position, and then promote that position.
I think you're only exaggerating. And remember, viewers, this: when Bill White was first elected, within the first 6 months of his administration, he confronted a shortfall in contingent liabilities, the pension fund. He had to go back to the voters and spend, to use Ms. Thurmond's comment, a lot of political capital to win a pension change that was very unpopular with public employees, to say nothing about a large number of the electorate. So my question was, where was that kind of leadership on issues like the red light camera? Right. She handed it off to the company that was handling it.
And that's one of the reasons it lost.
But he
didn't explain it right.
To my way of thinking, though, the 3-2, the term limitations, that's where everybody kicks the can down the road. So even the Mayor White kicked the can down the road for several items.
Well, they all know they have a lock they all know they have a lock for 6 years. Why do you need to lead or take any risks when you know all you got to do is raise money and you got 6 years?
Yeah, but 2-year terms of office, as we found at the commission, simply do not allow for the kind of foresight that our mayor wants. That Mayor Annise Parker has been pushing. That the drainage fee would require a 2 or 3 year discussion, but it had to get done rather quickly. Passed by 6,000 votes. It's still a contentious, and by anybody's account, its implementation has become very difficult because the ordinance that was having to implement a bad petition is rather awkward, and they don't even have a clear idea.
To answer David's question, I mean, they're all going to kick the can down the road. The objective is to get reelected. I mean, whether it's 6 or 8 years, it doesn't matter. 2-year terms, 4-year terms, or 3 2-year terms isn't going to make a difference. They're all going to kick down the road, refinance, restructure, and present a rosy picture.
To me, we're almost contradicting ourselves because in a way we say she doesn't show leadership. She doesn't show leadership. Their survey numbers are low. But at the same time, something's happening. There's certain things happening that have been accomplished, and she's losing political capital because of that. Is there some kind of tie in there? You can lose political capital without doing anything?
There's no question. I mean, the biggest loss, I think, for her was the indecisiveness on the red light camera, which is not her indecisiveness. It could have been the city attorney who advised her to go to a ballot. It could have been her indecisiveness when she was confronting.
Another
I mean, I'm not saying that she is personally responsible, but at the end of the day, and I want to be real clear about this, she's accountable, and these numbers. And I believe her own campaign seeing these same numbers. The other problem, I think, is, and it's no question, as the mayor has said and her supporters, these are bad times to make tough decisions. The night she's elected, she tells the voters of Houston, not that she's happy about her election, but they have to eat their vegetables because they're a tough time. She knew this from the get-go. But I do think this is not the kind of style of governance, or leadership if you want, that gets you a lot of votes. She's term limited. She'll probably run, and I believe will probably be reelected to a 3rd term. But it's not going to be the re-election that I want to look at. I want to see what she can do with the council.
Legacy.
You would think there could be a challenge because this city is full of people in poverty. If you read the story in the Chronicle this week, I mean, the poverty numbers are increasing. You know, it's increasingly minority. It's increasingly impoverished. Surely there's a candidate out there who will look to that group of voters and come up with the issues that can get their energy levels so that they can defeat a mayor of the type you're describing.
My guess is, and I think I'd like to hear Mr. Thurmond thinks about this, that the person that can beat an incumbent mayor like this would have to be another Bob Lanier, even a Bill White, someone who comes in without political experience but can claim they can manage the problem better. But
Sylvester Turner. That's my pick.
Perhaps.
I doubt it. I'm not even certain he would run, but it would have to be a crisis like Lanier had with the crime, which would be a very salient issue with a constituency like African Americans who often suffer disproportionately from that. It might have to be even over the Innocence Project, where there are these lineups of alleged lineups.
The crime lab thing.
Even
Crime rates
somebody
are
like
low.
Bill King.
No, the crime lab.
Bill's been doing a lot of work in terms of writing about important issues, and one has to wonder if he's not setting up for a future. Look, I can do it better. I've been on the outside, managing partner of a big law firm. I've written about these issues. I've warned you about these issues. Very intellectual approach to it, and perhaps he's getting ready for a launch next.
Mr.
next
Thurmond,
term.
you got 30 seconds to tell us who your candidate is for mayor.
Well, I have no preference. No.
Yeah, no preference.
But I would like to say one thing as far as the impoverished areas and everything. It depends on how important that issue is to the public at this moment.
Yeah.
So when the economy's down and everything, do people get as concerned about impoverished areas as when the economy is
Minority
up?
voters should be running
Yeah.
against cops. Thank you, Mr. Thurmond, Bob Stein, and Orlando Sanchez. We invite you to visit our home online at HoustonPBS.org. Click on the local program bar, red, white, and blue. Read about our guests, watch the shows, along with our follow-up discussion.
Coming up next, after tonight's Red, White, and Blue show, is the Houston Area League of Women Voters debate featuring the candidates running in the City of Houston mayoral race, moderated by our own Ernie Manous.
Get informed and get active.
And make sure you vote.